constructed truth. My name is Nilsson. I'm a textile artist working with various different craft disciplines as well as different technologies to do with textiles. In my work, I'm equally concerned with process as I am with concept, but I do still also work with design projects. I work with commissions and I work towards exhibitions where I express my work. I'm originally from Sweden, but I left Sweden in 2000 and I lived 10 years in London and have now been living in Ireland for 10 years. In this panel, we're going to explore how memories can be reconstructed and transcribed through the artistic process, and specifically then concentrating on textiles as an expressed media. My little team I have here, my panel, is Stanislava, who is sitting here, and she is a professor in psychology in Galway. And then we have Lesley Millar, who is professor of textile culture in Nilsson. So we will all try to express this, work on this theme around memory from different angles. I have called my introduction to this panel Memory, the Creative Muse. And it will evolve around my own work and my personal experience and how they are visually expressed through what to do with memory. And I've specially selected work for these presentations that only have to do with memory. All memories in some ways are fabricated, multi-layered, and woven together of stored experience and emotions. I'm going to kind of discuss with you how memory is the key to the past and the creation of renewed meaning of the original experience, while at the same time questioning, are memories a constructed truth, a true reflection of the original experience, or is it a distortion? Memory is for many artists, including myself, and acting as a driving force for our visual expressions, as it allows us to address and conceptualize the past and reflect upon its impact in personal and social context. I could call it this acting as a creative muse. My interest in memory has sprung from a personal fear of not being able to recall in a memory. That one day my memory stick will be full and no more space will be available. Through this, I have developed an interest in how memory is created. Photographs can act as a trigger of a certain moment. They make us recall and remember emotions as well as situations. These are some photos from my family album in the early 1960s in Sweden. Even if I was 4 years old in these photos, I do remember the day very clearly. It was a day my father had left with a new light blue car, and he was taking me for a drive out to a nearby village where they had geese walking wild in the streets. I remember having black clogs with a little red rim on them. I remember being terribly afraid of the geese, and I do remember that I was an ice cream. But I'm only able to recall these memories through the aid of the photos. Without those photographs, this day would have been lost in the mingling and overloading of experience that I've gained later on in my life. It's strange to consider that this day was a normal day at the time, but today, my father who took me there is gone, and that little girl that is on the photo, that is me, or was me, does not really exist anymore. But still, a photographic image is not really a physical reality, or even a copy of reality. The photographer, in this case my father, has chosen to sort of show me in this picturesque setting. I believe that photographs are a constructed truth. It only shows what the photographer wants to show, and it is silent. on the context. Photos are in some way a memoir, but I don't think they are the total truth. Written evidence is another factor that's important to me as a memory trigger. It has a trace of a mind and mark of the hand. The handwriting here carries an evocation of time, place, and person, which emails that we always send today is lacking. All written documents carry memory charges in themselves, encapsulated in the paper and the handwriting. It grounds the memory in a moment. But most of all, it is textiles that are recording my memory. For me, textiles such as clothes, sheets, tablecloths, tea towels, curtains, you mentioned them all, are important testaments to the past. I see textiles as important memorabilia. They are a statement of history, identity, culture, and of course, knowledge. A certain tablecloths have left an imprint of a long time gone, of family and friends at the table together, of Christmases and other birthdays and celebrations around the table. Textiles are in some sense more important in terms of memory making than a photo to me. They recall a deeper and more personal feeling. They stimulate a sensory feeling that photos doesn't give. This is, of course, very personal to me and my history. So the reason, I think, for obsession is that I grew up in a family where textiles were very important to mark the change of the season as well as marking special occasions and rite of passages. The variety of tablecloths in my mother's cupboard was extensive, and a lot of care was taken to keep them in pristine conditions that I, of course, had to help with, to mandle, to iron, to put in the cupboards. Most of them were hand-woven or embroidered by my mum or my grandmother. Textiles do, in fact, map my memories and is a symbol for the route through my life. Some years back, I started to collect Swedish tablecloths from the 50s and 60s, in the time when I was growing up. It was table linen that reminded me of past times and memories of special occasions where table linen had been an essential ingredient. I wanted to make some work where the tablecloths were used. And I wanted to catch that feeling that triggers my personal passion for the textile object. I could, of course, not destroy the family treasures, so I had to go out and hunt for copies. So I spent endless amount of time in my summer holidays in Sweden to go to charity shops and jumble sales. In the memory series from 2007 and 2008, which this piece is from, I've been combining the memory of the tablecloth with written evidence. And it's written evidence from my childhood, notes and letters of mine that I have been writing to my father when I was begging him for permission to do something or saying, I'm sorry for this and that, and I couldn't communicate verbally. I wrote him letters. And he, without my knowledge, collected them all and put them in a box in his chest of drawers. And when he died, I found this box with all those handwritten letters and small notes that I've been writing to. So I've been printing some of those onto the tablecloth. After that, the tablecloth has been laser cut, and that is to create this punctuated surface, to create gaps, to symbolize those moments that I do not remember anymore, those moments that I've lost through my journey through life. On the wall, a shadow will appear. The shadow is almost a copy of the real piece, but it's not really true. It is slightly distorted. In the same way as our memory is not exactly the same as the original experience. So the idea of shadow signifying and providing signifying and providing yet another layer, it becomes part of the work itself. Therefore, I have purposely started to manipulate the shadow, which in fact is a non-physical layer. The shadow can be seen as a parallel to the reality, with a hint of unworthiness. It is untouchable, and will of course take different shape depending on the light condition. This uncontrolled modification is seductive, and it has helped me to discover new ways to examine my work. I started out saying that all memories in some sense are fabricated, multi-layered, and woven together. Lately, I have explored the reasons why we remember certain things and not others. Our memory has gaps, and so do my perforated textiles. And they might, in some case, be constructed truth, consisting of the actual memory of the real experience, but mixed up with later knowledge, but also reworkings and combined with imagination. The visual experience of this piece is different from varying angles, and by this makes the question, what is the truth? The layering illustrates repetition, recall, and habit, and is referencing it on how memories are instituted. Recollection and remembrance are the key elements in establishing the past. And an experience we have fades and it gets distorted by time. A certain moment when we recall at a later stage is only reconstructions of the original record. I also talked before about the photographs, who can act as an aid to recall memory. In the aid of the photograph, we can sort of feel a certain sense, a certain feeling or smell from a moment that we don't, from a moment that we have experienced a long time ago. But for me, it's also the act of mark making that creates an even stronger imprint. In the late 90s, I painted my small children's bodies and printed them on paper. These prints represent to me a such much more stronger memory of a past time than actually the photo of my children. The prints fills me with memory of that very happy time when you can hold, smell, and sense your children's bodies. A moment that passes so quickly. Now, the bodies has grown, but the monoprints that I have are still the exact size of the bodies that they were 10 years ago. The original monoprint has been digitally manipulated to be the size the children are today. They are copies, but transformed. In the same way as a child is still the same person, but yet so different. The work is about reflections and mark making, and how through time it all gets hazy and almost blurred. It is through our own children that we relive our own childhood, and the borders in between the two gets blurred. The prints are to be experienced by walking in among them, as individual personalities or as a group. They all have their unique voice. As one walks among them, the pieces give fluctuating views from varying angles. It includes shadow, transparency, and repetition. It is touching on passing of time, looking back, layering of memory, and in construction of a truth that is only mine. Our lives and the lives of our families and friends exist in memory, like pictures that was never taken. They are elusive, intangible connections Memories are haunting and evocative. We consider them real, but are they really? Are they instead constructions of what we ourselves fabricate by embellishing one layer of memory on top of another? So, with this little introduction, I'm going to sort of finish with about my own work there, which has involved about my work and personal experience about memory and how it can be created, expressed. We kind of try to touch on the process of recollection and construction of memory. And I would sort of say that somehow I think that memories very much it can act as a creative muse. And I will finish just to say and ask a question that I don't really know if I have the answer to myself. Is memory constructed truth? Or is it perhaps the truth? So with that, I would like to hand over to my two guest speakers here. Stanislava Antonijevic and Lesley Millar. And Stanislava is going to start. And Stanislava acquired her doctorate degree in 2003 in University of Belgrade and has 2006 been employed in National University in Ireland and Norway in psychoanalytic, cognitive psychology and research methodology. So she is supposed to show a little bit more of a scientific light on some of those questions that I've been raising in my introduction.
At the beginning, I would like to say that actually we haven't met before. I haven't met Liz before I made the presentation, but we had this email conversation about what to present and what to add. And this sort of asked me to provide scientific explanation to the question. Now, I don't know whether I can do that. And I mean, in memory research, we know now a reasonable amount, and it ties actually really well. What I talk about ties really well with what Liz started and was part of her question. But I also thought to add maybe another element which might provoke then further maybe step in Liz's work, or maybe she could find that additional question. But let's see how it works. So the title is Mutability of the Mnemonic Structure. And that actually ties into the question that we were left with. Is memory the truth, or is it constructed truth? And how is it organized? What do we have? So first of all, as a scientific presentation, so memory is a process which is involved in retaining, retrieving, and using information about stimuli, images, events, ideas, skills, after the original information is gone. So there are these three processes. So we need to retain information, we need to retrieve it, because if we don't, then the memory is lost. And we use that information in the future. So the first question is how do we code information, or how is information or events or objects represented in our memory? And if you ask people who never explored that issue, usually what we have is something like this. So like a series of photographs, and you have seen that in this presentation as well. So we do connect photographs with memory. Photographs sort of stimulate our memory, but quite often we actually think about our memory as sort of a photo album. So we have certain events that happened in our past, events are usually have some time frame. And as you can see here, I put this here by purpose so that you could see that sometimes maybe this distance between 1972 and 73 was really long, but then distance between 73 and 75 is much shorter and so on. So it's not, we don't have this precise sense of time, but somehow have some subjective sense of time when these events happen. Usually, when people think about how are these events structured in memory, people think of something like a bookshelf or like a library, where we have these events sorted, coded, and when we need to remember, like someone asks you, I don't know, in 1980 on a certain day where you were, or what were you doing, and so on. And so you go back, find a book, see what's in there, look through the photographs, and then you remember what happened. Actually, if you look at the brain, it looks more like this. Okay, that we don't really see any or very much of a library order here. So the question is, how do we really, in the brain, how do we organize our memories? What is important is that memories are not randomly stored. And in a way, that's similarity with books in the library. So you have them organized in certain areas and so on. There is a certain organization. And I like to argue, and I have to say my main interest is language. And in language research, what we see is that words are organized into events. And that ties in nicely with the idea that memories are also organized into event structures. It's not that they are kind of on their own, but they're actually organized into event structures or event schemas. Event schemas are our knowledge which is involved in a particular type of event. Now, in order to kind of give you a better feeling what I mean by that, I will read you a little description, and I would like you to try to kind of from on the basis of your experience to try to guess which event is that. Okay. So the procedure is usually quite simple and the experience pleasurable, but it can also be a sort of great embarrassment. Sometimes you have to make a phone call in advance or even to wait a month. Once you get in, you are led to your place, but you might have to compete for it with other people. Then you read through a long list of suggestions and make a choice. After a while, you're presented with chosen items, one after the other. Normally, you enjoy them, but they also can turn to be great disappointment. Usually, you are invested to pay before leaving, but it also might be someone else's treat. So, I mean, as you all kind of felt through the, the description involves various different events which might be sort of attached to a restaurant or eating out. But you all had some of these experiences, maybe not all, but some of these experiences. And altogether, the description kind of fits into events which we call going to a restaurant or eating out. Now, how is this type of description, how is it formed? How do we form that? So what happens is we have some personal events of going to a restaurant. Then we watched some restaurants in movies, or someone told us about their experience, or I don't know, we passed near a restaurant and just had a look in, or I don't know, if you pass through streets in Italy, there are loads of restaurants that you just pass and kind of have a look. So you have this individual experience, or if you want to call it individual memories about that event. On the basis of these individual experiences, we don't just leave them like that, we can't group them. We group them according to some type of similarities. So all the events of similar type are grouped into a pub, and then other ones into a restaurant, and then other ones into al fresco. Then the next step, so one important thing here. So as Liz said, we have these experiences, but then we kind of do something with them, we change them, we mold them, we sort of mix them with other experiences. And this is the first result of some processes going on in our memory. Okay? So that already is not like a pure memory of event anymore, but it's still memory on which we work. And then we have this event of eating out. And all of the elements of the previous eating out event that ever happened in your life are somehow molded into that event schema. Now, if you think of all the events when you were eating out or when you were in a restaurant, I don't know how many you can remember, but I'm sure you went out to eat more than 100 times, so you would remember maybe 20 times. Okay? We'll come back to that and try to sort of see what are those events that you remember. So one of the things is, so we now have 4 existing schema of eating out. And we, as you could see from the description, there is a certain expectation what that event would involve. And then we have a new situation, which sometimes can be a bit unusual. Now, on the basis of your knowledge, I mean, why all kind of laughing, isn't it? Because on the basis of your knowledge and your existing schema, you have some expectation what is going to happen in a restaurant. Okay? And then you come to a restaurant to a new situation, which is a little bit different. Now, this situation is kind of a little bit different in let's say, not just one aspect. It's not just unusual furniture, but it's, let's say, in a way tied to the same process of consuming food, which is the other end of it. So it's kind of, it's very unusual in that respect. Now what happens is that our existing schema influences the way we code this event. Okay, so when we go in there, we kind of have this idea how the place should look like, and then it's not. And then you see these other kind of bits that belong to a different schema. But then you say, okay, I know what happens in a restaurant. This is a restaurant, so okay, this acts as a seat, this acts as a table, and so on and so forth. And you kind of code this new event according to your existing schema. And I think that this part Liz described through her work in a way. I think it would be interesting to add this other part, where new events actually modify the existing schema. It's not that we just encounter a new event and say, okay, fine, this event is not, does not completely match my schema, but fine. I mean, I know how to work around and how to call these elements so that they fit into my schema. But actually, that new event modifies the schema. In that way, there is a certain dynamic here that every time when we have a new event, that new event will modify the schema a bit. And that modified schema will then put just slightly different expectation when we do new event. And then again, the new event will change its life. And for example, sometimes when I have a lecture and people are talking to students, I ask them to describe a restaurant. And let's say if you go to different cultures or let's say different climates and ask people to describe their typical experience of a restaurant, in Ireland that would be either sort of like a pub or a closed restaurant, definitely. If you ask people in Spain, in Italy, it would be quite more frequent that people would describe some more fresco experience. So our original schema will depend upon our experience. But every time actually when we have a new event, this cycle will kind of change slightly. And as a result of let's say, visiting this place and this place, we might have a category of kind of weird or unusual restaurants. And maybe we should just end it. So this is the way that our schema will be sort of reorganized or enriched with our new experiences. Now, I said that if you let's say, if I ask you to remember what particular events of eating out you would remember, you would remember, certainly if you went to something like this or something like this, you would remember that, because that's very unusual, very different from our original schema. The other thing is if you had a very emotional event, okay, if, I don't know, first time you went out with your future husband, or I don't know, if you met someone that you really liked, or you had some family anniversary or something like that, that would be maybe event that you remember. Or if something very embarrassing happened, and you really want to forget that would also be event. So when there are intensive emotions, we tend to remember those events. When they are very unusual, we tend to remember those events. And then to sum up, so memories are not just kind of maybe I don't know the right word. I mean they are not just stored in memory as they come. Usually, if you look at your memory, if you look at your family albums, photographs will be sorted by date, and as they come, you kind of finish one book and then you do another book. You wouldn't organize, I don't know, all summer holidays or all eating out or anything like that. So memories are not stored according to when they happened in time exactly, but they are more likely organized according to the type of event. And individual instances would sort of mold into this kind of event schema and idea about the event. Event schemas are formed from personal experience, but also they include declarative knowledge. Depends on, it's kind of unlikely that you would get a formal introduction about what to do and how to behave in a restaurant. But about some situation and about some events, you would have more formal knowledge than real experience. But nevertheless, they also organize themselves into schemas or to contribute. Both of that type of experience will contribute to schemas. Existing schemas, and that has been shown in lots of research on memory, they influence the way we code new events, and the way we code new events influence the way we retrieve new events. So if you are asked to perform a task, to remember, let's say, a list of words, if I ask you to organize them in the way, to organize words that rhyme with one another, and you remember them in that way. If I ask you during the retrieval process, if I give you, let's say, one word from the rhyme, that will be reasonably easy to remember the other word. But if I ask you to do something else, to, let's say, list all the words that start with P or A or something, that would be very difficult to do, unless you remember them in such a way. Okay. So a process of remembering actually guides or influences strongly retrieval process. And also new events modify the existing schemas. So it's dynamic process. Memory is dynamic, and in a way, our existing memories code the way we perceive new events, but new events always add to our schemas and change them. And lots of research has been done testing actually this idea of former memories influencing what we remember. This is very important in eyewitness stories, and that's why it was researched a lot. And for example, if you look at the people who read a story and then asked, let's say, John went to a restaurant and did something or another, and 2 weeks later, they asked participants, did John pay in the restaurant? And of course, quite a lot of people don't remember whether in that particular story it said that he paid or not. But because we know, because our event schemas tell us that people normally pay in restaurants, quite a lot of people would be inclined to say yes, he paid. Although there wasn't anything about that mentioned in the story, in the original story, for example. Or if you look at a car accident, a little video of a car accident, and people are asked about the speed of cars afterwards. If there was a little sport car, people are much more likely to say that this car speeded than if that was some, let's say, old car or a limousine or something like that. So our knowledge and our memories of previous events would tend to influence the way we remember new events. Thank you.
I'm just interested, looking around the room, how amazingly stereotypical they are. Here we are talking about textiles, and I think I can only see two men in the room. Yes. So they don't know what they're missing. Thank you, Stanislava. I thought that was terrific. I mean, it just amazes me I can remember anything. It's quite something. Here we go. According to Primo Levi, one of the great humanitarians of the last century, the role of witness is one of bearing the mark in order to ensure that the memory does not fade. Cloth, its intimate relationship with our body, bears the marks of our being, both on the surface and embedded within the structure. The strains, stresses, stains and smells we impress upon this second skin forms an archive of our most intimate life. At the same time, cloth is also the membrane through which we establish our sense of becoming and formalise our relationship with the external world, while the fabric remorselessly records the evidence of these interactions. Jenny Sorkin has written that, and I quote, "Cloth holds sometimes unbearable gift of memory, and its memory is exacting. It does not forget. Even the benign scars of accident, the red wine on the white tablecloth, water on a silk blouse, dark patches underneath the arms on a humid summer's day." End quotes. And these scars will remain for as long as the cloth exists. And cloth has the potential for a very long life, as the quilts exhibition at Victoria and Albert in London reminds us, reappearing in different roles, accumulating new narratives as we patch and mend. Of all the material possessions that accompany us through our lives, cloth, in whatever role it has performed, most potently retains the remembrance of that contact. The Lithuanian textile artist Laima Otskaskaya, on the day following the death of her mother, found some of her mother's unfinished darning, a traditional white sock of homemade yarn. Finding that the image of her mother before her death was already fading, the darning was more like an abstract miniature textile. The white sock with its darning incomplete was something that remained of her mother, embodying what Christopher Tilley has described as, quotes, silent speech and written presence, speaking what cannot be spoken, writing what cannot be written, and articulating that which remains conceptually separated from social practice. A mediating surface, witnessing and retaining the evidence of our passing, sometimes precisely with traces of our DNA embedded in the fabric. Here you see Zana Betsina's extraordinary fabric fragments formed from microscopic photographs of skin. At other times, the recording is profoundly ambiguous, as we attempt to untangle the narrative of lives past through the stains, wear and tear, the choices of yarns, the patterns and context. And where there is ambiguity, there is room for interpretation. And where there is space for interpretation, you will find the artist. Today I will discuss this rich resource provided by the archive of memory inherent within cloth, through reference to specific case studies in which contemporary textile artists develop the relationship between cloth and memory. But before I speak about artists, I would like to talk about those memories of what Omibaba has described as cultural particularity that cannot be readily referenced through the passage of time. As in Afghanistan, where I am told there are textile folk patterns that are figurations of the sea. Afghanistan is landlocked. The tribal peoples of Afghanistan have no relationship with the sea, yet the sea is present in their traditional patterns, holding ancient memory of migration. In Cloth and Human Experience, the editors Jane Schneider and Annette B. Viner describe the range of symbolic and economic roles attributed to cloth as reflecting more than the labour invested in its production, citing, quotes, the connection of threads and weaving patterns with ancestral or mythical knowledge, end quote. Cloth holds the memory of our time and connects us with memories of other times and places. Another example would be the Hmong peoples of China, who were forcibly divided by the Han Chinese and their language outlawed, its use punishable by death. To preserve their language, the Hmong women hid their alphabet in the intricate designs of the pandal, the flower cloth embroidered textiles used for clothes and burial shrouds. Their original alphabet has now long been forgotten. The sounds were written only in pictorial form, handed down as design motifs from one generation to the next. The flower cloth patterns reinforced their ethnic identity for centuries. Indeed, one of the names they call themselves was embroidery people. Such examples as Afghanistan and Hmong peoples are memories held within the cloth and expressed as codified cultural text in the form of symbols and patterns which speak of the specific local culture, relationships with the surrounding natural environment, the skills of the maker, as well as the status and taste of the wearer. In the case cited of the Hmong peoples, it is not only a covert observance of cultural particularity and national identity, it is also a record of political expediency. There are many examples from the 20th century where artists living in occupied countries or under repressive regimes used pattern, predominantly in cloth, as a means of witness, as with the Association of the Relatives of the Disappeared in Chile, who took the traditional narrative applique technique known as aparilla to record those things they could not speak of, what they had seen and experienced, so that others would know. And I know there was an exhibition in Derry in 2008, which some of you may have seen. During the Soviet occupation of the Baltic countries, abstraction in art was forbidden, as it was throughout the Soviet Union. Whereas pattern, being merely decorative, could slip under the radar, providing a perfect subversive tool. The artists used the traditional, common understanding that each village has its own specific pattern, thus carrying a recognisable narrative of particularity. In this way, by using pattern and cloth, the artist would overtly state their cultural identity in opposition to the imposed identity of the occupier, without it actually being realised by the occupying force. Here you have an image of a work by the Latvian artist Petras Sīvāls. They are his work gloves, and they're knitted in a pattern that is totally specific to his birth area in Kurland in Latvia. Anyone in Latvia could tell you that. By turning these works into a work of art, he is stating his identity as a Latvian and not a Soviet artist. In linking this pattern to these worn work gloves, he is recording the many levels of who he is. In the years to come, his name may be lost, but his identity as an artist from Kurland who moved away is imprinted on these gloves. And so, I have segued almost seamlessly, into those artists who are working today with this very rich seam of reference. This is the work of Celia Pym, who's been exploring the relationship between memory and cloth for several years. In 2003, she undertook an extraordinary project in which she walked around Japan, knitting as she went. When she started her journey, all she carried was a ball of wool and the knitting needles. Something unformed, ready to become something. And slowly, that ball of wool was replaced by another and another, each recording a place experienced. And that experience became an accumulating weight of memory, manifest in an ever-growing, ever-heavier roll of knitting, which she carried with her until she finished her journey. And I accompanied her a little bit on this journey, and I can assure you it did get very, very heavy. Whereas by way of contrast, Naoko Yoshimoto is reversing the process. Using found items of cloth, she slowly and meticulously unpicks the weft, leaving only the warp threads held by one or two weft threads. She then prints an image of herself onto the warp threads, which is barely visible because of the inevitable movement of the threads. The unpicked weft threads are wrapped into a tight ball and labelled. The curator, Mary Hunt Kallenberg, has said that her Indonesian mentor described the warp as what is given in life, and the weft as what happens in life. Time and experience, life and memory. Naoko's memory and life, plus that of the original maker and the original owner, held in space and caught in the ball. Back to Celia. The work you see here was the starting point for a growing body of work that she's been involved with for the past few years. It's a sweater she inherited from her Uncle Rowley. He'd worn it through at the elbows, on both arms countless times, and each time a new hole appeared, her Aunt Elizabeth, his sister, would darn and repair the elbows. Uncle Rowley wore this sweater until he died, and when he died he was nearly 100. One arm had been repaired so often there was no original knitting left. The shape of the replaced sleeve looked like the original, but was stretched and thinner and thicker in places. It had grown slightly larger around the elbow as if to accommodate it. The sleeve was almost entirely made from repair, and so the original was no longer the original. This begs the question, is this still Uncle Rowley's sweater? As the original yarn is replaced, is it still the same sweater? Does it move from being Uncle Rowley's sweater to being Aunt Elizabeth's sweater? It's the old philosophical question of Theseus's boat. In Celia's words, I quote, "I recognise this as a slow and creeping change, the holes spreading gradually and Elizabeth's mending persistent and steady. It struck me that to replace the whole arm was not intentional, it had just happened. It had everything to do with time, and the gradual change that can be affected by time. The new arm is an echo of the old arm and retains the memory of what was there. Memory is in the fibres as they rub against each other. The new yarns pull against old yarns, stretching and wearing them down. And her work most recently has been as a recorder of time, in which people... Since the discovery of the sweater, Celia has been working with darning and knitting as interactive practice. For example, people bring their garments to be darned by her, which she does in the exhibition space, and records the provenance of the garments on the labels attached that you can see here. Or as exchange, where a worn sweater is passed between herself and another, each mending a little, sending it back, and then Celia would mend a bit, send it back to the other artist, and she would mend a bit, and so on until the garment is whole. And most recently her work is knitting as a recorder of time, in which she sets up clinics, and people book a certain amount of time with her to talk about a particular memory while she knits. And at the end of the agreed time, they have to agree a specific time, 20 minutes, half an hour, they can have an hour if they want. But at the end of that time, she stops the knitting, and the person who's given the knitting with a record noting the time spent, the date and the place. In all these works, Celia is performing an act of translation in which memory becomes material through the act of making. As much as Celia, Pim and Naoko Yoshimoto are using the high visibility of mending and bead construction as evidence of a life lived, Maxine Bristow is working to create surfaces of seeming anonymity. For Maxine, cloth is truly the silent witness to the repetitive routines of our daily lives. Her work explores those aspects of the built environment, such as light switches, handles, handrails, etc., with which we have an actual, physical, though often unconscious bodily relationship, and with which we interact through repeated patterns of behaviour. We enter a darkened room, turn on the light switch. We reach out for a rail or a banister when we are less sure of our footing. We lean against a padded backrest on a bus or a train. These actions that I've just described have become almost automatic through repetition. And with each touch, we leave a trace of ourselves on this seemingly anonymous surface. These patterns of behaviour are mirrored in her use of needlepoint, which in itself is both repetitive and anonymous. She used needlepoint initially as a comment on the repetitive and overlooked work done by women, which is necessary for the daily functioning of life, in the same way as the door handles, etc., are overlooked and necessary for the daily function of our lives. More recently, she has been exploring the forensic traces left by the maker and user within and on the structure of the fabric. She says herself that as she battles with the gesso fabric and the needles and actually the repetitive action of needlepoint, she is transferring her own DNA to the fabric. In her representation of the discrepancy between participant and observer, Maxine has settled on the use of a very formal, minimalist visual vocabulary. In this way, she's found a means of, as she says, and I quote, speaking through a language that is already so culturally loaded. The subjective narratives evoked through the materials, processes, and form of the work are silenced as it adopts the autonomous and authoritative formality of a minimalist aesthetic. And this is something that all of us working in textiles have to cope with. Textiles as a medium is very, very loaded we already have brings so much to it. And if you want to actually remove that loaded nature, how to do that. And Maxine, as I say, has adopted a very minimalist vocabulary and aesthetic. Forensic traces are also the inspiration for the most recent work by Shelley Goldsmith, as she tracks the narrative of the stain, the rip, the undone seam. Her starting point has been Lockhart's exchange principle, which is based on the pioneering work of the forensic scientist Edmund Lockhart. This principle is based on the exchange of physical evidence, that every contact leaves a trace. And from that trace, you can move backwards in time and find the cause. Which takes us back to the quote from Jenny Sorkin, and the cloth that holds the sometimes unbearable gift of memory. If you think about what forensic scientists have to do. Shelley's using found clothes bought from charity shops, jumble sales and eBay. She searches out the ones that have the telltale traces, the ones we all put back on the road. And she then amplifies the stains or tears with layers of etched images and layers of flooded colour, or sublimation prints. Images that are not quite images, more a reference to the Rorschach inkblot tests. The tests that are intended to tell us something about ourselves in the manner of our reading them. At other times, in an act of artistic reclamation, she helps the narrative along by placing the stained cloth within an imagined stroke real context, a context that contains both the original owners and Shelley's own trace elements in the DNA she leaves behind. So here she's presenting a dramatic scenario for you. She can read as you wish, but it is a dramatic scenario. At all times, she is moving the intimate and personal traces of the body from the inside to the outside of the garment, from the hidden to the exposed, forcing us, as viewers, to recognise our own fear and shame at the prospect of such visible evidence of our own trace elements. However, in other cultures, these very trace elements are the subject of love and honour. This is the work of the great Japanese textile artist, Shoko Tanaka, who has described this dark or dirty colour as a visualisation of the determination to be free from worldly desire. This garment is a kesa. It's traditionally worn by a Buddhist priest. It's also the Buddhist robe of mourning. And that is what it represents here for Tanaka. The kesa is a rectilinear fabric made up of many pieces of cloth, stitched together in a very particular format. According to tradition, the cloth itself is worthless. It is the accretion of memory which gives the cloth its value. The most appropriate cloth would be soiled or discarded rags. Central to this is the transference of identity through the cloth. And often there would be a lock of hair or a fragment of a fingernail sewn into the garment in one corner. The making of the kesa is an act of devotion in itself. The stitched quilting needs careful concentration, while prayers or mantras are repeated at each stage. It is a very complex process, and I'm not going to go into the making of the kesa. It is highly devotional. Tanaka's kesa series were begun at a time of loss, the deaths of her father and mother, which precipitated what she calls an emptiness of my mind. Into this emptiness, she began to layer memories of her parents, and through this, an equivalent layering of cloth. A beautiful example of the combining of the ritual and the personal as a work of art. vis-a-vis on limit. And it's also an act of remembrance. But this is a public and collaborative act of remembrance. Through her installation, Desconocida unknown. Both words mean unknown. Desconocida in Spanish and unknown in English. The central element of this work is a wall covered with 1,537 name tags that have been hand embroidered by participants in workshops in 22 different countries. The ones with the coloured thread each contain the name of a woman murdered in Juarez, a town in the Amarexica border between Mexico and the USA, and it's recently been much more in the news because of the drug wars there. But the women who have disappeared to trafficking or been murdered, it's been going on for 18 years now, at least. And I say that, there are known to be, according to this, 700 women murdered. The number is much, much, much more. There has been no police follow-up. The only bodies are bodies that are dug up by their mothers who go out and dig the ground and try to find them. The name tags embroidered in white bear the word unknown in the language of the embroiderer and represent all the unknown women in the world who have suffered similarly. This work embodies memory at all levels, most particularly the memory of the women who have died. Also, the work contains the memory of the people who embroidered the names. By embroidering the name, the embroiderer has somehow become one with the name. No one who has embroidered the name forgets the name. The embroiderer now also bears the mark of witness. And so, we've moved in this very short time through the role of cloth as the accidental, international, contrived witness to our cultural, personal, invisible, intimate, ritual, projected, and political memories. I could, had time permitted, have cited as many more artists and as many more and more again who have and continue to respond to this theme. The narratives they present are not sentimental representations of the past, but material records of deliberate connection to the past and to the future, which are located in the present, the now of making. The relationship between memory and cloth is not about here and now, here and there, now and then. Rather, the act of making enables different sets of relationships to take place simultaneously between the artist and the act of witness, the translation of that witnessing, and the development of a personal narrative, all of which are inherent within the process and evidenced in the work, the piece of cloth. The work becomes the witness to the memory. In exactly the same way, the mundane textiles that accompany us through our lives bear the marks of what we were, what we are, and what we can be. In conclusion, I'd like to quote the artist Richard Tupple, writing about a piece of turmeric-dyed Indonesian cloth, and I quote, "Turmeric laughs, boundaries lessen, light transfers. Turmeric glows like some still tropical dusk, just before night falling. These were moments I remembered, I might have again, and pass on to you through this weaving."